Hi, I'm Santona Tuli. I'm head of data at Upsolver, and I have a morning ritual. Every morning, I do a pour over coffee for myself. Takes about 10 minutes, and it frees my mind. I buy local coffee. So now that I live in Northern Virginia, I get coffee from this local roaster called Vigilante Coffee. They're quite good, and yeah, when I move, I try out what's around there and switch to something new.
Hi, my name is Roy Hasson. I'm the head of product at Upsolver. I don't actually drink coffee, I drink tea. I'm a big fan of teas, different kind of teas. My favorite is a matcha tea. So I actually get my matcha tea from Laird Hamilton Superfoods. It has matcha, of course. It has some functional mushrooms. I drink that every single day. It gives you some clarity and it's just awesome. I love it. In addition to that, I drink chai tea every afternoon as well. So that's my daily ritual.
Welcome to the MLOps Community Podcast. I am your host, Dimitri Os, and today I'm flying solo as a host, but we've got two guests to double the fun. They're both working at Upsolver, and it was an absolute pleasure to chat with them. Let's dive in real quick, just get a little background on who these people are that we're talking to before I give you my takeaway and we jump into the conversation. All right, so Santona is a Ph.D. and she began her journey into data through the world of physics, banging particles together at CERN to detect rare particles, which is absolutely awesome. I think I remember one time I read in the newspaper about how France was going to bang some particles together and we may blow up because I'm in Europe, and so watch out for that. But I don't know if Santona had a part in that or not. I just remember that day. Now that I told the story, I realize it was not as good as I remember it. All that ride with no destination. There we go. This is what you get to expect from me, folks. I'm on my own today. I got no one to save me. Anyway, Santona went and she started working in Python when she realized that, hey, I really like data orchestration. And she started programming data orchestration tools like Airflow, helping improve the developer experience. And I believe she went and she worked with the managed Airflow company called Astronomer. That's right, Astronomer. And currently she is at Upsolver and she's got a bit of a product mindset. She leads data engineering and science. So data engineering and data science. And she is driving developer research and engagement for the declarative workflow authoring framework in SQL. I think Roy was kind on me and he gave me a much less detailed intro about himself or background. So Roy is head of product at Upsolver. He's helping companies deliver high quality data to their analytics and ML tools. Previously, before he was at Upsolver, he led product management for AWS Glue and AWS Lake Formation. This conversation I loved because both Santona and Roy bring a product mindset to what they're doing, and we dove deep into that. We talked a lot about how you can be more successful coming from that product mindset. They mentioned how you want to talk to the end users, whoever it is that you're building for, and you want to ask them. And it sounds simple. It's like, yeah, of course you do that. But how many of us actually do this? If we're building platforms like we're building an ML platform for our company, or we're building just any kind of data platform, do we go out and talk to the users who are using these platforms? Do we go ask them every day, how can I make it better? What can I do to meet your needs? What are you struggling with? This is the product mindset that both of our guests today were advocating for, and it was cool to see. I mean, I think that everyone is going to need a little more product fundamentals in the way that they see the world, especially as more and more of these hard problems that we thought could only be solved by using some complicated machine learning, they're starting to become less and less hard because you can ping an API that's just a large language model. Maybe I'm oversimplifying, and I am going to be the first to say I don't know how true that is going to be, but I still think no matter what, whether or not that is true, a product mindset and product fundamentals are going to be useful for you along your journey. The other thing that Santona mentioned that I wanted to point out was how she talked about how at her job, she is so cross-functional and how important this idea of dog fooding is. So if you are building for others, you want to ask them what their pains are, but you also want to work with the tools that you're creating to see what is painful so you can have a little bit more empathy for those users. So let's dive into this conversation and hear it from them specifically. But before we do that, I must mention that this is a podcast that loves to be shared. It's like your aunt's Facebook post. They just love to be shared by the family and they get about 2 likes. But you know what? Might as well share it. If you found some value in it, please go ahead, send it to one of your friends, let them know that they got to listen to this. It is an absolute joy that I get to do this every week. I get to come and sit here and be with you all and interview such bright minds and hear the way that they see the world, the way that they build product, the way that they're thinking about machine learning and MLOps. I love it. And it is thanks to you that is possible. Let's jump into the conversation. We need to begin with the backstory on how this happened, how we are here with the both of you, because I think it is worth mentioning that I was hosting the DreCon conference, or I guess that's a little repetitive, DreCon conference, but yeah. I was hosting the Data Reliability Engineering Conference, and Roy, you were there, you were watching and soaking in all of the insights, as was I, while I was hosting, and we were talking, we sparked up a conversation, and I realized that you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom that is worth sharing. And so I invited you on here and you said, that's great, but it would be even better if I brought Santona with me because she's doing all kinds of incredible stuff with machine learning. So this is the tag team, if you will. Roy, you are more in the data engineering space. Santona, you're on the machine learning engineering side. But I get the feeling you probably have a lot of overlap. And I'm excited to explore that overlap. I'm excited to explore what you all have been doing. And then I'm also very excited to talk about what the different solutions are and these buzzwords. What is hype? What is not hype in your eyes these days? Because there is so much noise, whether it is just around data engineering concepts or if we, God forbid, we start talking about AI and how much noise is in that field. So yeah, it's probably worth just doing a little bit of a round on who you all are, what you're doing, how you came to be where you're at. And Roy, I'll have you kick us off, please.
Yeah, sure. I'm currently the head of product at a company called Upsolver. We're a data analytics product that focused on making high quality data ingestion easy for companies and for users. I started in my data career working for AWS back in 2016. A lot of hands-on working directly with customers to build, their data infrastructure, right? The data platforms, all, AWS services, but building data lakes, building data warehouses, all the infrastructure that kind of goes with it. And then throughout my years in AWS, I kind of switched roles. I was doing some go-to-market stuff for analytics for a while, and then I became a product manager. So I was a product manager for AWS Glue and then AWS Lake Formation. So data processing and then data security. And then I switched over. I left and I went to Upsolver. So I have a lot of kind of hands-on experience helping people write Spark code, debug HiveQL code, debug clusters and issues like that, and just a lot of hands-on experience in building and dealing with these things. When I'm participating on events like DreCon and things like that, you hear a lot of high-level talk about these things, and to me, it's always like, well, what's the next level down, right? Like, how do you actually implement, and what does that mean? So that's kind of what gets me excited.
That is where I would love to go today in this conversation. Yep. But before we do, Santona, for those who are not already familiar with you. And if they aren't, I highly recommend giving you a follow on LinkedIn because you share so much insight on there. Can you give us your story?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Demetrius. Kind as always. As you said, I've traditionally been doing a little bit more ML than analytics or data engineering. So I started through particle physics, where, I mean, it's really more end-to-end data science. ML is used to extract the signals, but there's just so much more that goes into it. There's capturing the data while it's being produced at really fast rates, pipelining them, feature engineering, heavy feature engineering, and then you go to the ML. And I think that's true everywhere, right? You can't find an ML use case that doesn't involve just a lot of feature engineering. And then from there, I worked as an NLP engineer, ML engineer for an NLP product. So I owned the ML service that we had. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of like DevOps type work as well, in addition to what you would normally, or you might naively think of as ML. And then I did do some analytics work at Astronomer, which was the last place I was at before Upsolver, writing pipelines in Airflow, both for analytics use cases and ML use cases. And then I switched over here to Upsolver with Roy. And yeah, we do data. We're a data engineering tool. We help you ingest real-time streaming or batch data into your warehouse or lake. We also have a lake that does in-place transformations, very optimized. And it's a cool tool that I wanted to help explore.
First question coming hot out the gate is, as a product and machine learning profiles that we have on this call right now, or this conversation, how do you all find is optimal to work together?
So I think there's maybe two parts to this question. I think the first part is, how do I and Santona work together to kind of evangelize that idea? And then the second part is, how do we, the product teams, the data teams, and the ML teams work together? So I think from how do we, like myself and Santona, work together, Santona is the one that spends a lot of time out in the community. I do as well, but she spends a lot of time with the community, data engineers, ML engineers, operators, business leaders, et cetera, to kind of understand what some of the challenges are, right? We all talk tech and we all can read slides, but when the rubber meets the road, right, there's a bunch of issues that come up that sometimes people just feel like they're just part of the problem, and I don't really need to describe them because I'm just going to deal with them, right? Like data quality be one of them, where like, well, just the way things have been, like why am I talking about this? But we want to hear those things, right? We want to get that information out. And then, Santona does a really good job at kind of extracting those pain points, those paper cuts. And then together we sit and we try to understand, well, what are the best ways that we can think about solving these things? Is there technology on the market that's already addressing those things? Is there new technology that we should develop? How do we incorporate those things into our product so we can then help our customers solve these paper cuts? Because the simpler we make life for our users, ultimately, the better it's going to be. The second part of how do companies work together, right? I think there's a shift in companies' mentality to become more product oriented. Initially, we were data-driven companies. Now we want to become more product-oriented companies. It's really easy to say that. It's really easy to put that label, but in reality, it's actually really hard to implement, because having a product mindset is not just, thinking I'm going to package this into a product. Like, you have to think about, what do my users need? How am I going to solve those problems? What technology exists? What's the best way to solve these problems, not just to solve them, right? So I think that's the piece that we're still trying to educate, not just us, right? I think the community or the industry is really trying to learn better of how to apply product best practices or product thinking to more parts of the business. The teams that are building the application that's facing the users understand product better, right? They do surveys, they do studies, they understand, they get feedback, they measure everything, and they study that, and they figure out how do they make things better. The internal teams don't necessarily do that, especially on the data side. Data side has always been, we're basically the end, right? All the data flows downstream to the analytics dam, right? And then when you get there, somebody tries to do something with it, but there's rarely a conversation with the end consumers to say, well, does this meet your needs? What can I do better? How can I improve this? That's what we always see, like finger pointing, the business saying, yeah, these guys aren't moving fast enough. They need to do more for us. This thing's always broken. How do we get them to move faster? You know what? They're not going to move faster, so I'm just going to do it on my own, right? That's not the way we solve things, right? We got to communicate. We got to work together. So we're definitely seeing that conversation starting to become more front and center, which is really awesome to see. And we're obviously participating in that and trying to learn from that and see what can we apply on the technology side, on the tool side, to make people's life easier. And then, of course, there's people processes that you can't really, build into a tool.
The most straightforward way I can think of answering that question is by expressing how much I love the fact that my role is cross-functional and just how cross-functional it is. So it's product and it's data and it's engineering and it's also user research, market research, like all of these things like have to work together in order for me to do my job well. And it extends much beyond me. Like I feel like in the tooling space, right? Like both at my previous company and this company, like if you want to build for other data scientists and data engineers a useful product that's also easy to use, like user friendly, you have to use we call it dog fooding, right? If you use the product, you have to use other products out there, play around with it. And I mean, that's another part of it that I love is I just get to play with tools. So like the number of tools that I know, how to use is much larger than it would be if I was on a team where we were using one stack. So just that exposure and talking to people and learning so much is what I love about this role.
And do you feel like that is something that is common across different teams and especially when you're looking at the machine learning engineer position, because there are so many stakeholders, you do need to be talking to so many different people and looking at so many different tools, because one stakeholder may optimize for one thing and another may be looking at something else?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. And that's, I think, the other angle of the data product discussion today is like, what about building data products or ML products, right? As opposed to being a product manager or a data scientist for a data tool. And yes, the degree of overlap there, in my experience, is huge. And like good data scientists and good machine learning engineers will have a really thorough understanding of whatever they're building as a product, right? And I've found that it's a skill that you can develop with time. So certainly it's a learnable skill, but not only understanding. It's not just about talking to the different stakeholders and figuring out what everyone wants, right? It's that you could have scope creep and like things could get really large, but then distilling that down and figuring out, strategizing around what to build, what not to build, and how to like address as many of those stakeholder needs and use cases by building one thing. So all of those, like thinking hard about solving a problem, I think is a common thread. It doesn't matter if it's ML work or data work or product work. It's really just problem solving.
I was going to just add to that. I think Santona really hit it on the head, right? And we're kind of throwing the word product around a lot, but many times in these organizations, there really isn't a clear definition of what does that mean. There's a lot of things that go into building a product and building a sustainable, reliable product. And those are the things that we really need to help companies unpack. Because remember, like within a startup, you have ML teams, things like that. Like people are building a product company, they know. But in enterprises, there's a product team that's out there on the side, and there's a lot of internal infrastructure teams that can say the word product, but don't necessarily know what that means and what that entails. And it's really important to sort of distill that down into what does that actually mean, right? Like, how do you build a roadmap for your thing that you're building? What infrastructure are you going to build to be able to serve that to your end consumers? What kind of guarantees and reliability are you going to give them, right? Is there API spec, right? Is this thing going to be 99.9% available or not? Right? What does your support look like, right? If something breaks, what is that going to look like, right? So there's a bunch of things that go into making something a product that's beyond just, have a roadmap and treat it as a product. Like, what does that mean, right? So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are still trying to understand what that means. And we're sort of saying the words, but we're not actually doing the actions. And I'm seeing like in our tooling, we're trying to build more automation around this. Like I'll tell you, like in Upsolver, for example, when a user uses it to deliver a data set to an end consumer, right, whether it's for analytics or ML, we try to bundle a lot of the capabilities that you need around data management, consistently updating the data, making sure that stuff, if your source system breaks or stops delivering data for some reason, like your pipelines don't break and all of a sudden you have to fix it, right? Like we automate that recovery from those failures. And those are infrastructure things that you have to build to have a reliable data product. Now, if you're not using a tool, then you got to do it all on your own. But I really see like our tooling in the industry need to get better at simplifying this, because the teams that are building products aren't infrastructure experts, right? They don't have those tools. They don't have those capabilities, right? Like an application team will have a team that does infrastructure. They will have a team that handles, the backend servers and the databases. Like they're structured to deliver a product. But an ML team is not designed to deliver a product. They're designed to deliver a model, right? And they're responsible to go spin up Kubernetes or whatever with an API front end and deliver, highly scalable inference endpoint that maybe they don't know how to do, right? They can technically put it up, but they don't know how to, manage it as a product. And I think that's where the disconnect is in a lot of the conversations.
There's one thing I wanted to add / offer a slightly maybe different view than Roy, which is it's so interesting to me when thinking about product for external end users as opposed to thinking about data and ML products for internal usage. Like there are things that transfer and then there are things that don't. And so I kind of want to hear from Roy what you think about, you just said we kind of say product, but it's not always the same product, like concepts and ideas. But I feel like there is something to be said for, it's a different scale, right? If you're often, if you're building an ML application, let's say that you want, your total addressable market is very large. Everyone could find some potential use for your tool, versus when you're building a prediction that's going to help, let's say, your customer success team or something like that with their work. Like that is an ML-based data product that is internal, and it's a much smaller user base. It's a very narrow use case. So what are the things that you think we absolutely should bring in the same sort of product concepts into that internal product versus what really doesn't make sense to bring?
Scale is the one that is always the first in the conversation. And you're right. In some cases, if it's externally facing, usually that scale is really high. If it's internal, like you just get the support team, that scale isn't the problem, right? But it's the reliability, right? It's the availability of that service. If that service goes down, if your ML prediction service for your support team goes down and they can't use it, is it a deal breaker? Is the world going to end? Probably not. But if you're going to call it a product, if you're going to actually treat it that way, then treat it that way. If today your company has 2 support engineers, tomorrow you have 50 support engineers, well, if you built it to support 2 with some, easy kind of Python script that's running on your local machine, it's not going to work for 50 users anymore. If tomorrow somebody says, oh, wow, this is really awesome, I want to embed this in dashboards, right? So it's not an individual user logging in and clicking a thing. Now it's embedded in dashboards, and those dashboards are automatically refreshed every 10 minutes. Now your scale just went way up, right? Without even thinking about it. So I think the scale is definitely one that can kind of like come and go, like it really depends. But the other ones are reliability. Like, what's the uptime of this thing? Like, how can I depend on this? What's the quality of this? Like, who is in charge of that model or that data set that if it looks weird or it doesn't look correct or maybe there's some missing values, like who am I going to call? Like, who is going to fix it? If I have any additions to it, if I have roadmap changes that I want to make to that, right? Like, I got to have a process. I got to have a way for somebody to come in and say, hey, I want you to add this, or I want you to change that. The other thing that you often see is, feedback. Like, how do I learn from what's going on? Like, I can throw a model over the fence and have people use it, but if I don't have any mechanisms to collect feedback, I don't know if it's good or it's not. I only know if people use it or don't use it. Once I stop using it, do I just abandon it? Like, I don't know what happened, right? So feedback is huge, and it's something that I don't see a lot in internal tools. It's usually based on emails and asking people, but it's not based on sort of like collecting live feedback like we do in product, right? You know how many millions of events we are collecting from all over our product just to understand the usage. Those are things that, we talk about it, but they usually are a little bit harder to do, and folks don't typically implement them, especially for internal-facing sort of products.
I'm Emmanuel Mason, machine learning engineer at Stripe and author of Building Machine Learning Powered Applications. And if you don't want your machine learning models to explode, well, you should subscribe to this podcast.
How many times have we heard, oh, this is the company tool and it's so painful to use? It really is. That's like the downstream effect of not having those mechanisms in place.
Yeah.
And
sometimes you have to use those tools. There's no other tool, right?
Yeah, exactly. To the dismay of the whole team. They're
That's
not
right.
stoked on it, but they have to. And so I totally feel you on that.
That's a perfect example. So like if you hate that tool so much, but you treat it as a product, then you'll know right away that you're using it or aren't happy, right?
Okay.
If you don't treat it as a product, then eventually you'll hear all the emails and you'll see, but you don't know why.
Especially like we tend to get attached to our tools sometimes too. I think, especially if you're building developer productivity tools, right, internally. And they say, oh, this is the best way to do this. Let's get everyone at the company using it. But maybe it's a bad UI, and you haven't, you don't have any way of telling that people are actually going behind back doors to avoid using your tool.
This is a great segue into another idea that I was thinking about as you were talking, which is around building for data engineers versus building for data scientists, and how different those profiles seem to be. I mean, you do have the occasional crossover data scientist who understands Kubernetes and understands data pipelines and understands everything that you need to know when it comes to like DevOps and data engineering, and they are that unicorn that you want to hold on to and never let them go. But for the most part, a lot of the data scientists that come into the field have backgrounds in economics or physics, and they maybe are messing around with a bit of Python, but they're not necessarily so advanced when it comes to the coding side of things. And I know there's a lot of people that are very vocal about this and trying to help data scientists become more used to using Git or more used to using clean code fundamentals. But as we are talking about this product idea and building products, especially if it's like you're building an internal platform for your company, and you need to service not only data engineers, machine learning engineers, but also data scientists, what are some things that automatically come to mind?
I am going to be a little bit controversial.
I like that.
So I've had I've been especially fortunate in this, but I've had the fortune of working with folks across various organizations being more technical. And I have actually found in a couple of cases that we were not treating our user base with we underestimated what they would have wanted. So I mean, it's all about figuring out what your users actually want, right? That's the bottom line. So I guess my point really is that you can go both ways. You can end up building something that's too complex for someone to use for their workflows, and then it's useless. But also, if you build something that is doesn't, because the trade-off is usually it's either complex or it doesn't do everything, right? That's usually where the trade-off happens. So if you sort of try to make everything like too streamlined or more point and click, then you end up in the situations where it's not a flexible tool. Personally, too, I would rather like learn how any given tool or library or whatever works and like get it to do what I want it to do than be restricted. So I mean that's one of my biggest things with like BI tools, for instance, and data visualization tools in particular. Like, I would much rather generate a plot in Plotly or something like that than make a pre-made Sankey chart or something like that. So that's because that's how I see it. I do like to have that power user in mind when thinking about products or who we're building for. But I want to temper that by also saying that when you're building product, they say like it's 80-20, right? Like make sure that you build something that most people are going to get value from, and then you can think about like how do I bring in more people into the discourse. But yeah, so that's my semi-controversial answer.
I'll just add to that. I think I agree with what Santona was saying. The way I see it, or the way I sort of explain it, is your product, the product that you're building, needs to target a specific set of audience, right? Specific target user, right? You're never going to build a product that targets everybody, right? Because you're going to make everybody unhappy. So you need to sort of focus on who is your target audience, what do you need to give them to make their experience the best and allow them to work the fastest and the most convenient way that they know how. So for example, I may build a product that's targeted for data engineers, right? Because I want a data engineer to have an easy way to move data from a source system, define data quality expectations on that data, and then deliver it to your target system like Snowflake or Redshift or Data Lake or whatever, right? So I want to make that experience as easy as possible. So I will build my product to focus on that. Now, I don't want to alienate the other users. Like a machine learning engineer may say, hey, I want to read data from Postgres, this particular table, and I want to store it in a data lake in CSV files because I would then want to build my TensorFlow model on top of that. Great. Now, do I need to make my user experience or my product fit them? They're not quite my target audience. I can try to do that. But the way I look at it is focus on your target audience for your user experience and then allow your product to be extensible, right? Have those APIs, have the SDK, have the CLI, have the hooks that users can come in and say, hey, I'm an ML engineer. Actually, I feel very comfortable inside of a Jupyter notebook. I don't want to use your UI. I just want to plug into it, right? I want to use the engine, but I want to use my own interface. And I think that's the most powerful way to do things. Right? And that's the way we're sort of thinking about design in AWS too, is like you have the core design for your target audience, but the APIs are there. The integrations are there. So if you want to plug in something else that's easier for you, go do it. Because at the end of the day, where you're going to make people most efficient is by letting them pick the tools that they know already and just run with it. Like forcing them into a new user interface or a new tool and having to teach them how to do it. Okay, yeah, it may work, but it's just going to take a long time, right? People aren't going to always be happy. I already have all my libraries and all my tools in this other system. Like, how do I get them over here? Allow me to do it. Allow me to bring my tool and plug into your engine. And that's really the big benefit of a data platform, right? A platform is not about solving everybody's problems, about providing an interface to the core engine that you can plug in different systems and make it easy for everybody to be effective.
Love that.
Yeah, I think with good products, it's almost like little Easter eggs that you can find if you're like a power user, right? Like one easy thing that comes to mind is like you might have a pre-configured default Kubernetes pod that is going to launch for any user, but then you let people configure their own what they want in their pod as well as a secondary thing. Like, so the person who knows how to do that, great. but also the person who doesn't know is going to get something that should be fairly optimized for simple use cases.
So changing gears a little bit, Roy, you mentioned before we hit record about how you wanted to discuss what value we are solving for when it comes to these users, and we're creating solutions, but what are we creating these solutions for? Can we dive into that a little bit, and maybe you can kick off that discussion for us?
Yeah, I mean it's a broad statement, so let me maybe try to focus it a little bit. I'll tell you in particular, kind of like what we're trying to do at Upsolver. We originally built a data pipeline solution, right? So users can write SQL. It builds a data pipeline for them to move data from point A to point B. They can do transformations in the middle, et cetera, et cetera. Sort of a lot of the focus in the industry has sort of not moved on, but sort of shifted towards identifying and improving the quality of data. So like we helped users build the pipeline, right? The infrastructure to deliver data, but we didn't really pay attention to the data inside of it. Like that was sort of up to you, right? And as we start having more and more of those conversations with customers and potential customers, we've heard the challenge over and over again. Like, yeah, okay, you can move data into the warehouse. Yes, you can get it in there, but it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. Like, how do we then address it? And we can run tests and we can do all these things, but they're a bit reactive. They're after the fact. If I run the test, the data's already in a warehouse. People are already depending on it. The model is already trying to run on it, and it's already breaking. So what do I do now? The test failed. Okay, fantastic. Now I got to go find where the problem is and fix it. But you already loaded the data in, right? So we sort of took a step back and we said, okay, we can just be a dumb pipe and load stuff in, or we can double click on these problems and find solutions for our users that will actually help them solve the real problem. Like how do we change the outcome, right? Just loading data in a pipeline does not change the outcome. Loading reliable data or loading high quality data in a reliable way changes the outcome, because now you can start building trust, right, on that data, where before it wasn't reliable. Like if something showed up, great. If some rows were missing, I don't really know that, right? Until, I run my report on my dashboard, all of a sudden my bar graph is a little smaller than it used to be. I'm like, what happened, right? I can't trust it, right? And we see this in our users where they're like, you know what? I don't really trust this. I'm just going to unload the data from the warehouse into Excel, and I'm going to do it on my own, right? Because I can trust myself. So that's sort of what I'm talking about, where we say there's a data problem, right? This data quality problem, and then quickly unpacking what that actually means and finding those paper cuts that allow you to actually solve the problem. So like one of the biggest paper cuts that we hear, two of them are, how do I know when my schema changes? And the second one is, how do I know how fresh my data is? Sounds fairly simple, right? But these problems always come up in every conversation that we're having. The first thing is, how do I know when somebody adds a column or drops a column or changes a column? And the second one is, how do I know when was the last time my table was updated? Like this is super, super simple, right? But it seems to be a problem. So if these are really painful paper cuts, like why don't we go solve them? So those are some of the problems that we then, Santona and myself and engineering team kind of dove into and say, okay, let's take the big problem of data quality, unpack it, and then find those little things, those paper cuts that we can go solve.
So good. So yeah, just thinking about the bigger picture and thinking about the user experience from a holistic point of view, as opposed to just, this is my space that I've carved out and I'm going to just focus on this space, right?
Right.
It's thinking about what is the end result. And I think in marketing, they have this term, jobs to be done. Have you heard of that one before?
Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of like that. Hey, I just want the end result. I want the picture. I've always heard it said as, I want a picture on my wall. I don't want a hammer and a nail and a handyman to put that picture on the wall, right? I just want the picture on the wall. Let's get to that. How can I get to that the most efficiently, whether it's with a drill or a hammer or a handyman coming and helping me?
That's right. And so, sorry to just double back on what you just said. Like, I think that's a perfect example of what we see on LinkedIn these days. And I love LinkedIn. I love all the people who post stuff there. But that's sort of what you see. You see these architecture diagrams. You see these long posts about, the handyman and the hammers and the nails and the wall and the tape measure and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, technically it's fantastic, but I just want to know, when was the last time my table was updated? Like, just make that easy for me, right? Give me that solution, and please don't make me buy a whole new system just to tell me that bit of information. And that's another thing that kind of drives me a little crazy in our industry these days. Is like, if there's a problem, there's a product for it. Like, I don't need 15 different products to solve these little paper cuts, right? How do I consolidate? The whole idea of us, and I wrote something like that on LinkedIn, I think, recently. As a vendor, my job is to help solve problems and make users' life easier, but it's also my job to help you simplify your end-to-end architecture, right? The more products I'm adding, like, it's good for me, but it's not good for you, right? Because now you have 15 different products you got to manage, 15 different vendors you got to deal with and pay money to, support and blah, 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 and all those things. Like, just make it simpler. If you can simplify it, let's simplify it.
Yeah, the tooling sprawl is real. And it's not only real in data engineering, it's the same with machine learning engineering. It's everywhere. And a lot of times, I think with machine learning engineering and just MLOps in general, what you get is there's different tools that have a certain value prop, and that's what they message as their main value prop. But they also do 5 other things. And then there's another tool that has a main value prop, but it does those same 5 other things. And so if you want those 2 main value props, you're going to have to decide, what are you going to do those 5 other things? Which tool are you going to use for those 5 other things?
Right. And they may not be good at those other things. They may just say they do it, or they have, basic capability of it, but they may not be good for that. They may not be the right tool for that.
Yep.
Right?
So you got to get another tool for those 5 other tools for those other things. So
that's right.
It definitely is a bit of a pain, and also navigating this space to know which tools do what. And I know, at least for me, it was even worse, I think, a year ago, and now I think it's probably moved more when it comes to the large language model sphere. It is very much like this now, where you're trying to navigate through these websites and you can't really tell what the different tools do because it all sounds the same. And you just sprinkle a little bit of marketing jargon on it and then talk about, my favorite thing used to be to find websites that would quote the 80% of machine learning models never make it into production. And it's like, whoever made up that statistic has got to be so happy because they're the most quoted by every tool out there. And so these days, I don't think I see it as much because all the machine learning models are large and they're all in production now. It's just how reliable they are. That is another story.
I think it's also really important to, for all of us to clearly distinguish and differentiate between this is fun and I want to go play with it and I want to check it out, to this is the day job and this is to be reliable, this is to be accurate, this needs to be, stable. Playing with a lot of cool stuff and then quickly trying to bring it to your day job and say, hey, let's just throw it in here and add it. Like, no, like, this is a business, you're running a business. Like, you need to be reliable. You can't just bring toys into your day job, right? In your free time, go for it, go nuts, right? Have fun, learn all this stuff. But draw a clear distinction, a clear line between when do you shift stuff over. And I think that's where some of the maturity around these models and these tools really need to come in. And like, I can play with them, but until these things are mature, these things have a lot of best practices built around them. There's some good case studies of companies using them at scale and going through all the pains and tribulations of using those tools. Don't bring them into your day job, unless you have a big team that you're comfortable testing this and you're comfortable doing this. But most companies don't have that. Like, most companies don't have an army of data engineers who can go play with all these new tools. And if Flink breaks for some reason, they can go write some code, contribute it back to the open source and fix the problem. Not many people have that, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be careful when you bring, these tools into your day job.
Yeah, you got to look at it more like a skunkworks program.
Yeah.
And recognizing this is R&D, this is not core to our business. So I wanted to ask a question here because we mentioned also before before we started recording about things that you would have loved to have learned 5 years ago. And you 5 years ago, talking to yourself, what are some things that you could tell that past self that would help accelerate their growth and their knowledge in this field?
I think I would have, so 5 years ago, I was finishing up my Ph.D. Or getting close to finishing up my Ph.D. And I think at the time hadn't fully committed to the idea of doing data science outside of academia. I was considering different options. So it's going to be a very different answer from Roy's answer. But I would have liked to know more about what options were out there with a analytical problem-solving mindset. I think I fortunately ended up in an area that's a very good fit for me, and I really enjoy doing the work. But that's what would have been relevant to me. So I feel like that's who I'm speaking to right now, right? Grad students who are about to figure out what's next. So that's a part that's relevant. And then also, I learned this with time and kind of proved it to myself, but it also would have been nice if someone said, hey, a lot of the work that you've done is super transferable to what you're going to be doing 5 years from now. There's like statistics courses that you've had to take and, figuring out confidence intervals and stuff like that. It's all useful, impactful, and people are going to, respect your data analysis because you have that background.
How about you, Roy? 5 years ago, what would you have liked to have known, or what are some things that you feel like would have helped you accelerate your learnings? Or even 3 years ago, 2 years ago, it doesn't necessarily need to be, because 5 years ago, I think maybe it's too far back.
Well, yeah. I think what would have helped me 3 or so years ago is sort of understanding better in how to navigate sort of the strong opinions that people have about solutions, technology, approaches, things like that. I feel like in the technology space, especially in data engineering and ML, like there's it's almost like religion. Like different people have different religions within this industry, like the ETL versus ELT. Like it's such a big religion. Like you're either one or the other. Data modeling. There's people who live and die by data modeling. There's others who say like this is pointless, right? I'm not saying one is better than the other. All I'm saying is that I think for me it would have been kind of better to be prepared that there is this, this preference and this sort of like religion between them. Because in my mind it's technology, right? It's multiple ways to solve the same problem. Choose which one. If you want to do something a certain way, that's fine. That's your choice, right? But people are very sort of like of a mindset like this is the only way to solve the problem. This is the best way. And there's a million ways. And you can argue all those points till you're blue in the face, right? You're always going to make the same argument. This one is scalable. No, this one's scalable. This one's performant. No, this one's performant, right? So just kind of knowing how to navigate that a little bit smoother. It doesn't trigger a lot of these emotions from different people. That I think that makes things a little bit easier. It's very easy to spark those conversations and to get like these eccentric views and get people wild up and crazy about that stuff. I don't know how productive that is, to be honest. So maybe if I had to summarize, it's kind of knowing how to navigate personal opinions and preferences around technologies and ways of doing things. Kind of would have helped me a little bit better to kind of connect with more people and maybe to be more effective in the way I communicate.
Well, thank you both for coming on here. I think we're going to end it there. That was a perfect finishing point. And both of you, for anyone that wants to follow you all, we're going to leave all of the links in the description. Anyone who wants to continue the conversation can go and check that out and reach out to you all.
Awesome.
Thank you, Son.
No, I will not recommend your podcast. As the ML lead engineer at DKB Bank, I'm definitely not wanting other engineers to have all this relevant information, and I will not give my name, which is Lena. So definitely, I do not recommend this podcast.